The morning light filtered through the towering Douglas firs, casting dappled shadows across the wooden porch where 8-year-old Lily Morgan sat perfectly still. Her small hands were folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on a single point in the forest that stretched beyond their isolated cabin. She hadn't spoken a word in 3 days, not to her father, not to her new therapist, not to the squirrel that regularly visited their bird feeder. Her silence was deliberate, a fortress she'd built around herself since they'd moved to this remote corner of Oregon. Inside the cabin, her father David paced the worn floorboards, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in hushed tones with Lily's doctor back in Portland. "No, there's been no change," he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "She still won't speak. She just watches the forest for hours." He paused, listening to the response. "I know moving her away from the city was a risk, but after her mother—" His voice cracked slightly. "After Sarah died, I thought a fresh start might help." The doctor's voice was faint but reassuring through the phone. "Give her time, David. Children with autism process grief differently. The environmental change might be overwhelming her right now." David glanced through the window at his daughter's rigid posture. Lily had been diagnosed with autism when she was 4, but she'd always had her mother to help navigate the overwhelming world around her. Sarah had understood Lily in ways David struggled to, creating routines and safe spaces that made sense to their daughter. But since the car accident 6 months ago, Lily had retreated further into herself, and David felt increasingly helpless. "I just wish she'd talk to me," he whispered. "I don't know how to reach her." After hanging up, David stepped onto the porch, careful not to make sudden movements that might startle Lily. He sat down beside her, maintaining the careful distance she preferred. "Hey, sweet pea," he said softly. "I was thinking about making pancakes for lunch. The blueberry kind you like." Lily didn't turn to look at him, but her fingers twitched slightly, a tiny acknowledgement that she'd heard him. David had learned to look for these subtle responses, the microscopic ways his daughter communicated when words failed her. "I'll take that as a yes," he said, smiling even though his heart ached. He was about to stand when Lily's posture suddenly changed. Her back straightened, her head tilted slightly, and her eyes widened with unusual focus. David followed her gaze and saw what had captured her attention. A small fox cub had emerged from the underbrush at the edge of their property. Its russet fur was bright against the dark forest floor, and it moved with cautious curiosity, stopping every few steps to sniff the air. "That's a fox kid," David whispered, afraid to break the moment. "They're usually shy around people." The fox inched closer to their yard, seemingly unaware of the human observers. David remained perfectly still, recognizing the rare opportunity to witness such a young fox in daylight. But to his astonishment, Lily slowly rose from her seat and took a deliberate step forward. "Lily, wait," he started to caution, but something in her determined stance made him stop. The fox froze, ears twitching forward as it noticed Lily's movement. For a breathless moment, David expected it to dart back into the safety of the forest. Instead, it tilted its head curiously, mirroring Lily's own posture with uncanny precision. Lily took another step, then another, moving with a deliberate slowness that seemed calculated not to frighten the wild animal. David watched in amazement as his daughter, who found most human interactions overwhelming, approached the fox with perfect confidence. When she was about 15 feet from the fox, Lily stopped and knelt down, her movements fluid and natural. She extended one hand, palm facing upward, a gesture David had never seen her use before. The fox kit watched her, its bushy tail flicking nervously, caught between curiosity and caution. Then, defying all odds, it took a tentative step toward Lily. David held his breath. He knew he should probably call Lily back. Wild animals could be unpredictable. and foxes occasionally carry diseases. Yet he couldn't bring himself to interrupt this extraordinary moment. The fox crept closer until it was just a few feet from Lily's outstretched hand. It sniffed the air cautiously, whiskers twitching. Then David noticed something he hadn't seen before, a small patch of matted fur on the fox's right hind leg, in the subtle way it favored its other legs. The fox was injured. As if sensing his realization, Lily turned her head slightly toward her father. "He's hurt," she said, her voice soft but clear, the first words she'd spoken in days. The shock of hearing her speak nearly made David stumble. "Lily." "He needs help," she continued, her focus returning to the fox. "Like Mom tried to help that deer." The reference to Sarah pierced David's heart. 6 months ago, Sarah had swerved their car to avoid hitting a deer that had darted onto the rainy highway. The resulting crash had taken her life instantly, while Lily, secured in her booster seat, had emerged physically unharmed but emotionally shattered. The fox kid inched closer to Lily, close enough now that David could see it was indeed a male, and the injury on its leg looked like a nasty gash, possibly from barbed wire or a predator's grasp. With surprising boldness, the fox sniffed Lily's fingers, its nose twitching rapidly. Then, in a moment that seemed to stop time, the fox kit pressed its small head against Lily's palm. Lily made a sound, not quite a laugh, but a soft exhalation of wonder that David hadn't heard since before the accident. Her entire body seemed to relax, the perpetual tension in her shoulders melting away as she gently stroked the fox's head with one finger. "His name is Rusty," she declared with absolute certainty. David stepped forward carefully, not wanting to frighten the fox or break the spell of this incredible moment. "Lily, wild foxes don't usually let people touch them. This is extraordinary." Lily didn't respond to him directly, but continued her gentle contact with the fox. "His family is gone," she said, with the matter-of-fact tone she often used when stating what she perceived as obvious truths. "He's alone now." David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Oregon morning air. The parallels were impossible to miss. A young fox, alone and injured, finding connection with his equally wounded daughter. Before he could formulate a response, the fox kit suddenly tensed, ears swiveling toward a sound in the forest that human ears couldn't detect. In an instant, it pulled away from Lily's touch and darted back into the underbrush, a flash of russet disappearing among the shadows. Lily remained kneeling, her hand still extended toward the space where the fox had been. Then she turned to her father, her eyes clearer and more focused than they had been in months. "He'll come back," she said, with complete conviction. "He needs me." David knelt beside his daughter, careful to maintain the distance she usually required. "Lily, that was amazing. You spoke to him." She nodded, her gaze drifting back to the forest edge. "He understands. Not like people." David felt a conflicting surge of emotions, joy at hearing his daughter's voice again, relief that she had found something that sparked her interest, and concern about her attachment to a wild animal. But overwhelming all of that was gratitude for whatever had brought this moment of connection. "Maybe we should leave some food for him," David suggested cautiously. "If he's hurt, he might be having trouble hunting." Lily considered this, then nodded once. "Clean water too. And a blanket." As they walked back to the cabin together, still maintaining their careful distance, David felt a flicker of hope he hadn't experienced since the accident. His daughter's silence had broken, and somehow, impossibly, it had taken a wild fox to accomplish what therapy sessions and his own desperate attempts had failed to do. What he didn't yet understand was how completely this chance encounter would change their lives and just how dangerous this new connection might become. The next morning, David awoke to find Lily's bed empty. For a heart-stopping moment, panic surged through him. Then he glanced out the window, and saw her small figure sitting cross-legged in the yard, perfectly still in the golden dawn light. Relief gave way to curiosity as he noticed what she was doing. Lily had arranged a careful semicircle of offerings at the edge of their property where the forest began. A shallow dish of water, a small plate with what looked like pieces of chicken, and David squinted to make sure he was seeing correctly. One of her soft blue blankets folded into a neat square. He pulled on a sweatshirt and stepped outside, the dew-damp grass cool against his bare feet. Lily didn't acknowledge his approach, but he knew she was aware of his presence. Her spatial awareness had always been remarkable, one of the many surprising strengths that came with her autism. "You've been busy," he said softly, stopping a few feet behind her. "Did you take that chicken from the refrigerator?" Lily nodded once. "It was leftover. I didn't use the new package." Her literal interpretation of his question made David smile. He'd been more concerned about her handling raw meat than about their food supplies. But of course Lily had answered exactly what he'd asked. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, noting that she was still in her star-patterned pajamas. "Since the birds started singing," she replied, her gaze never leaving the forest's edge. 1 hour and 23 minutes. David's heart ached with a bittersweet mixture of joy and concern. Hearing Lily speak again after her long silence was miraculous, but her sudden fixation on the fox worried him. He'd seen how intensely she could become attached to ideas or objects, how devastated she could be when routines were disrupted. What if the fox never returned? "Lily, I'm happy you want to help the fox, but we need to remember that wild animals." "He's coming," Lily interrupted, her body tensing slightly. David followed her gaze and saw a flicker of movement among the ferns. Sure enough, the russet form of the fox kid emerged cautiously from the undergrowth, nose twitching as it detected the food Lily had left. The fox approached with the same cautious determination it had shown yesterday, its injured leg still held slightly aloft. In the clear morning light, David could see that the kit was young, probably only a few months old, and thinner than it should be. The gash on its leg looked angry and red, though it didn't appear to be bleeding actively. "His leg is worse," Lily whispered. "It's infected." David was surprised by her assessment, but as he looked closer, he could see she was right. The area around the wound was swollen, and the fox's movements seemed more labored than the day before. The kit reached the plate of chicken and sniffed it hesitantly before taking a small piece. It ate quickly but remained alert, ears constantly swiveling to detect potential threats. After finishing the meat, it lapped at the water, then surprised David by investigating the blanket, pawing at it curiously. "He needs medicine," Lily said, her voice steady and certain. "Like the medicine you put on my scrape when I fell." David ran a hand through his hair, conflicted. "Lily, it's not that simple. Wild animals aren't like pets. If he's really injured, he might need a wildlife rehabilitator." Lily turned to look at him directly, a rare occurrence that emphasized the importance of what she was saying. "No, they'll take him away." David recognized the sudden rigidity in her posture, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the beginnings of what could become overwhelming distress. He chose his next words carefully. What if his leg doesn't get better on its own? He could get very sick. Lily considered this, her gaze returning to the fox, who had now settled onto the blue blanket, its small body curled into a tight ball with its tail covering its nose. "I can help him," she said finally. "If he trusts me, I can put medicine on his leg." David watched as the fox's eyes began to close, its small body relaxing despite their presence just yards away. The trust it showed was remarkable and somewhat concerning. A healthy wild fox should maintain more caution around humans. "Let me make a call first," David said. "There's a veterinarian in town who might know about treating wildlife. Maybe she can give us advice without taking him away." Lily nodded, though her expression remained guarded. "I'll stay with him." Inside the cabin, David located the business card for Dr. Elena Perez, the veterinarian they'd met briefly when first moving to the area. He'd stopped by her clinic to ask about local wildlife they might encounter, concerned about Lily's safety in their new rural setting. Dr. Perez answered on the third ring, her voice warm but professional. "Wildwood Veterinary Clinic. Dr. Perez? This is David Morgan. We met a few weeks ago. I moved into the old Collins cabin with my daughter." "Of course, Mr. Morgan. How can I help you today?" David hesitated, unsure how to explain the situation without sounding irresponsible. "We have an unusual situation. There's a fox kit that's been visiting our property. It's injured, a cut on its leg that looks infected. My daughter has formed a sort of connection with it." "How close has your daughter gotten to this fox?" Dr. Perez asked, her tone shifting to concern. "Close enough to touch it," David admitted. "I know that sounds alarming, but there's more to it. Lily has autism, and she hasn't spoken since her mother died 6 months ago. But she's talking to this fox. It's the first real breakthrough she's had." There was a pause on the line. "I understand this is a complex situation, Mr. Morgan, but I need to be clear. Foxes can carry rabies, even young ones. If this kid has allowed human contact, it may be because it's not well." David glanced out the window where Lily remained sitting near the fox, who was still curled on the blue blanket. "It doesn't seem aggressive, just young and hurt. Even so, the standard protocol would be for a wildlife rehabilitator to take the fox for proper care and evaluation. My daughter is adamant about not taking him away," David said, the strain evident in his voice. "I'm afraid it would trigger a severe regression. She's convinced she can help treat its leg herself." Dr. Perez sighed. "Normally, I'd insist on proper protocols, but I understand the situation with your daughter is delicate." She paused again. "How about this? I can stop by your property on my lunch break. I'll assess the fox from a safe distance and determine if it's showing any signs of rabies or other dangerous conditions. If it seems otherwise healthy aside from the wound, I can provide some basic supplies for treating the leg and advise you how to proceed with minimal intervention." Relief washed over David. "That would be incredible. Thank you." "I'm not making any promises," Dr. Perez cautioned. "If the fox is exhibiting signs of rabies or serious illness, I will have to insist on proper wildlife protocols. For everyone's safety, including your daughter's." "I understand," David agreed. "We're about 7 miles out on Pine Creek Road, the blue cabin with the stone chimney." After hanging up, David returned to the yard, where Lily hadn't moved from her vigilant position. The fox kit was still sleeping on the blanket, its small sides rising and falling with rapid breaths. "A veterinarian is going to visit later," David explained, keeping his voice low. "She knows about wild animals, and she might be able to help us treat Rusty's leg." Lily tensed momentarily at the mention of outside help, but then gave a small nod of acceptance. "Will she take him away?" "Not if he's otherwise healthy," David assured her. "She just wants to make sure he's not too sick to stay in the wild." Lily seemed to accept this answer, her gaze returning to the sleeping fox. "He doesn't have anyone else," she said softly. "His mom isn't coming back. Like mine." The words hit David like a physical blow. He crouched down, although he maintained the distance that Lily preferred. "How do you know his mom isn't coming back?" he asked gently. Lily's fingers played with the hem of her pajama top, a self-soothing gesture she often used when discussing difficult topics. "I can tell. He smells different." "Smells different," David repeated, curious about her perception. "Like being alone." Lily's face remained impassive, but her voice carried a depth of understanding that made David's throat tighten. "Mom smelled like sunshine and cinnamon." Now our house smells different. It smells like being alone." David struggled to find words, struck by his daughter's profound sensory connection to her grief. Before he could respond, the fox kit stirred, its eyes opening as a rustle sounded from the edge of the forest. Both Lily and David went still as a larger animal emerged from the trees. A coyote, lean and predatory, its yellow eyes fixed on the vulnerable fox kit. The coyote took a step forward, lips pulling back to reveal sharp teeth. In an instant, Lily moved with startling speed, positioning herself between the coyote and the fox kit. "And no," she shouted with unexpected force. "Go away." David's heart nearly stopped. "Lily," he shouted, rushing forward. The coyote hesitated, startled by the human voices and movement. Behind Lily, the fox kit was fully awake now, its small body trembling as it tried to press itself deeper into the blanket. David didn't think. He just reacted, grabbing a nearby garden rake and positioning himself in front of Lily. "Get back," he yelled at the coyote, swinging the rake in a wide arc. The coyote took a step back, assessing the threat. For a terrible moment, David feared it might attack anyway, but then it turned and loped back into the forest, disappearing among the trees. David dropped the rake and spun around, grabbing Lily by the shoulders. "Don't ever do that again," he said, his voice shaking with fear and adrenaline. "Coyotes are dangerous, Lily. They could hurt you badly." Lily's body went rigid at his touch, her eyes widening in distress. David immediately released her, mentally kicking himself for forgetting her sensitivity to being grabbed. But instead of retreating into herself as she typically would after such an overwhelming moment, Lily turned back to the fox kit. "It's okay, Rusty," she said softly, kneeling beside the terrified animal. "The bad one is gone now. We won't let it hurt you." Dr. Elena Perez arrived at the Morgan cabin precisely at noon, her weathered pickup truck bouncing along the rutted driveway. David watched her approach from the kitchen window, noting her confident movements as she gathered a medical bag from the passenger seat. She was younger than he'd remembered, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the tan complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. Lily hadn't moved from her post near the fox kit, who had eventually relaxed enough to eat more chicken and explore the immediate area around the blanket, though it kept its injured leg carefully elevated. David had tried several times to convince Lily to come inside, change out of her pajamas, and eat something, but she had refused with the quiet, immovable determination that he recognized all too well. David stepped onto the porch as Dr. Perez approached. "Thank you for coming," he said, extending his hand. She shook it firmly. "I'm still not sure this is the right approach, Mr. Morgan, but I understand the unique circumstances." Her gaze shifted to Lily and the fox kit. "Is that them?" David nodded. "That's my daughter, Lily. She hasn't left the fox's side all morning. There was an incident with a coyote earlier." Dr. Perez's eyebrows shot up. "A coyote? Is everyone okay?" "Yes, but it was close." The coyote seemed interested in the fox kit. Lily put herself between them before I could reach her. David ran a hand through his hair, still shaken by the memory. "I scared it off with a garden tool, but it was terrifying. Coyotes aren't usually aggressive toward humans, but they're opportunistic predators. They'll certainly go after a young fox," Dr. Perez observed, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "Your daughter must care deeply about this little guy to take such a risk." "She does," David confirmed. "Rusty, that's what she's named him, is the first thing she's connected with since her mother died. It's like something awakened in her when she saw him." Dr. Perez nodded thoughtfully. "Let's take a look, then." I'll need to move slowly and keep some distance at first. I don't want to startle the fox or upset your daughter." They approached Lily and Rusty together, moving deliberately. David called softly to his daughter, "Lily, this is Dr. Perez. She's the veterinarian I told you about. She's here to help Rusty." Lily glanced up briefly, then returned her gaze to the fox kit. "He's tired now. His leg hurts more." Dr. Perez knelt down several feet away, setting her bag beside her. "Hello, Lily. That's a beautiful fox you're looking after." Her voice was gentle but not condescending, the same tone she might use with any patient's concerned owner. "May I see his leg from here?" Lily didn't answer directly, but she shifted slightly to give the veterinarian a better view of Rusty. The fox kit remained curled on the blanket, watching the newcomer with wary eyes. Dr. Perez studied the animal carefully. "He's a red fox kit, probably about 3 months old," she commented. "Young enough that he should still be with his mother, but old enough that he's learned some independence." She leaned forward slightly, focusing on the injured leg. "That wound looks like it could be from barbed wire or perhaps a snare. Unfortunately, we have some irresponsible trappers in these parts." David frowned. "Are there many trappers around here?" "We haven't seen any traps near our property." "Not legally, no. This area is protected forest land, but that doesn't stop some people," Dr. Perez explained. "The good news is that your fox friend here doesn't show any signs of rabies that I can detect from this distance. His eyes are clear, his coordination seems good despite the injury, and his behavior, while unusually trusting, doesn't display the aggression or disorientation we'd expect from a rabid animal." She turned to Lily. "Lily, has Rusty let you touch his injured leg at all?" Lily shook her head. "He pulls it away, but he lets me pet his head and back." Dr. Perez nodded. "That's very normal. Animals protect their injuries, even from those they trust." She reached into her medical bag and pulled out several items. A small brown bottle, a package of gauze, and what looked like a jar of honey. "I'm going to leave these supplies here, and I'll explain how you can help clean his wound, if you'd like to try." Lily's eyes lit up with interest, a rare expression that made David's heart ache with both joy and caution. "This is diluted povidone iodine," Dr. Perez explained, holding up the brown bottle. "It's gentle but effective for cleaning wounds. The gauze is for applying it, and this," she indicated the jar, "is medical-grade honey. It's one of the best natural antibacterials we have, and it's safe even if he licks it off." Dr. Perez looked at David. "I'm breaking some rules here, Mr. Morgan. Technically, I should be insisting this kit go to a wildlife rehabilitator. But I've worked with enough children on the spectrum to understand that sometimes we need to find different approaches." David nodded gratefully. "I appreciate that more than I can say. However," she continued, her expression growing serious, "there are conditions. If the fox's condition worsens, or if he shows any sign of aggression or unusual behavior, you must call me immediately. And Lily must never be left unsupervised with him. Wild animals are unpredictable, even ones that seem friendly." "Of course," David agreed readily. "And if the infection doesn't improve, then we'll need to reconsider. A serious infection could kill him without proper antibiotics, which I can't legally provide for wildlife without the proper channels." She turned back to Lily. "Do you understand all of that, Lily? This is a partnership. You, your dad, and me all working together to help Rusty." Lily glanced up, her gaze meeting Dr. Perez's for a brief moment before shifting away. "Yes, partners." Dr. Perez smiled. "Good. Now, here's how you can clean his wound if he'll let you." For the next several minutes, Dr. Perez demonstrated the proper technique for cleaning an animal wound. using a stuffed animal from her bag as a model. Lily watched with intense focus, absorbing every detail. David was reminded of how his daughter could become an expert on topics that interested her, studying and memorizing information with remarkable precision. The most important thing, Dr. Perez concluded, is to let Rusty decide if he's ready. You can't force him to accept treatment. He needs to trust you. He trusts me, Lily said with absolute certainty. To demonstrate, she extended her hand toward Rusty, who immediately stretched his neck to sniff her fingers. The fox kit then pushed his head against her palm in a gesture that seemed remarkably similar to a cat seeking attention. Dr. Perez's eyes widened. That's unusual. He really has bonded with you. As if to prove her point further, Rusty cautiously pulled himself onto Lily's lap, curling up with a small sigh. Lily remained perfectly still, her expression serene in a way David hadn't seen since before Sarah's death. Extraordinary, Dr. Perez murmured. In my 15 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen a wild fox this comfortable with humans, especially one that wasn't raised in captivity. She began packing up her medical bag, leaving the treatment supplies within Lily's reach. I'd like to stop by again in a couple of days to check on Rusty's progress, if that's all right with you. That would be great, David said, walking with her back toward her truck. When they were out of Lily's earshot, he asked in a lowered voice, "What do you really think? Will his leg heal on its own?" Dr. Perez sighed, looking back at Lily and Rusty. It's hard to say without a closer examination. The wound isn't as deep as I initially feared, which is good news. If they can keep it clean and prevent further infection, he might recover without intervention. Foxes are remarkably resilient. She hesitated, then added, "But there's something else we need to discuss. This fox kid is young, but he's approaching the age where he should be learning critical survival skills from his mother or siblings. How to hunt effectively, how to avoid predators, how to find safe shelter. Without that guidance, and with this growing attachment to humans, he might not survive if he returns to the wild," David finished for her. Exactly. And keeping a fox as a pet is illegal in Oregon, for good reason. They're wild animals with specific needs that most homes can't provide. She pulled a business card from her pocket and wrote something on the back. This is the number for a wildlife sanctuary about 40 miles north of here. They rehabilitate injured animals and, when possible, release them back into the wild. But they also provide permanent homes for animals that can't be released. David took the card, his chest tightening as he thought about how Lily might react to the idea of sending Rusty away. Let's see how his leg does first. Dr. Perez nodded. Of course, one step at a time. But Mr. Morgan, she paused, her expression softening. I know how much this means to your daughter. I've seen animal therapy work wonders for children who struggle with traditional communication. Just prepare yourself. This situation has no perfect solution. After Dr. Perez drove away, David returned to Lily and Rusty. His daughter was carefully sorting through the medical supplies, arranging them in a neat row on a flat rock beside her. Are you hungry? He asked. You haven't eaten anything all day. A sandwich would be acceptable, Lily replied, not looking up from her task. Peanut butter, no crust. David smiled. It was the most normal request he'd heard from her in months. One peanut butter sandwich, no crust, coming up. Would Rusty like anything special? Dr. Perez mentioned that raw meat might be better for him than cooked chicken. Lily considered this. He needs protein to heal. Raw meat, small pieces, and water, clean water. I'll bring it all out, David promised, heading back to the cabin. As he prepared Lily's sandwich, he glanced occasionally out the window. Lily was speaking to Rusty in a low voice, her hands moving in small, precise gestures that reminded David of how Sarah used to communicate with their daughter during overwhelming moments. Then, as David watched, something remarkable happened. Lily gently stroked Rusty's back, and the fox kit slowly extended his injured leg toward her, as if finally offering permission for her to help. With movements so careful they seemed almost ceremonial, Lily prepared a small piece of gauze with the diluted iodine solution and began to clean the wound. David held his breath, expecting the fox to recoil or possibly even snap at her. Instead, Rusty remained perfectly still, his eyes half closed in what looked like an expression of trust. When Lily finished cleaning the wound, she applied a small amount of the medical honey, her small fingers working with surprising dexterity. Only when the treatment was complete did Rusty pull his leg back, curling it beneath him as he settled more comfortably on Lily's lap. Lily looked up at the window then, somehow sensing David's gaze, and their eyes met across the distance. For the briefest moment, David saw something in his daughter's expression that he hadn't seen since before the accident, a flash of pride, of accomplishment, of connection. He felt a lump form in his throat. This wild fox had somehow managed to reach a part of Lily that had been locked away in grief, a part that all their careful therapy sessions and his own desperate attempts at connection had failed to access. It was a miracle, a complicated, potentially problematic miracle that he knew couldn't last forever, but a miracle nonetheless. As he gathered food and water to bring outside, David's mind returned to Dr. Perez's warning and the sanctuary card now tucked in his pocket. One step at a time, he reminded himself. One day at a time. Over the next week, a remarkable transformation took place both in Rusty and in Lily. The fox kit's wound began to heal, the angry redness fading to a healthier pink as the infection responded to Lily's careful twice-daily treatments. His gait became steadier, though he still favored the leg when running or playing. And play he did. As Rusty's strength returned, so did his natural curiosity and energy. Each morning, he would emerge from the forest where he apparently spent his nights, trotting directly to Lily's waiting form on the porch. David had given up trying to keep his daughter indoors at dawn. Now he simply made sure she was dressed warmly and had breakfast waiting when she eventually came inside. Lily and Rusty developed their own language, a combination of sounds and gestures that David found fascinating to observe. When Rusty wanted to play, he would bring small objects, pine cones, leaves, sometimes even colorful stones, and place them at Lily's feet. When he was hungry, he would nudge her hand with his nose. And when he was tired, he would curl up beside her, often with his head resting on her shoe. Lily, in turn, was speaking more each day, not just to Rusty, but occasionally to David as well. Short sentences, observations about the weather or requests for food, but each one felt like a gift after months of silence. Dr. Perez had visited twice more, each time expressing amazement at Rusty's recovery and at the extraordinary bond forming between girl and fox. On her last visit, she had brought a book about fox behavior and left it for Lily, who had spent hours poring over the pages with intense concentration. It was on a crisp Saturday morning, nearly 10 days after Rusty had first appeared, that David decided they needed to venture into town for supplies. Their pantry was growing sparse, and David had been putting off the trip, reluctant to disrupt the fragile new routine that had developed. "Lily," he said gently as she sat on the porch steps with Rusty, "we need to go to town today to get groceries. Just for a couple of hours." Lily didn't look up from where she was carefully checking Rusty's healing wound. "I'm staying with Rusty." David had anticipated this response. "Rusty will be okay for a little while. He survived on his own before he met you, remember? He needs his medicine, Lily insisted, her voice taking on the flat quality it often did when she was becoming distressed. And the coyote might come back. David knelt down, maintaining the distance Lily preferred. What if we leave him extra food? And we can put his blanket in a safe spot so he has somewhere to hide if he needs to. Lily's hands began to flick rapidly against her thighs, another sign of rising anxiety. David recognized he was pushing into difficult territory, but they genuinely needed supplies, and he worried about the intensity of Lily's attachment to the fox. Dr. Perez had warned him about the importance of maintaining some boundaries. "Lily, look at me," he said, careful to keep his voice calm and even. "Rusty is getting stronger every day because of your help, but we can't stay here every minute. We have to trust that he knows how to take care of himself, too." Lily's eyes briefly met his, then darted away. She was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to Rusty, who was now investigating a beetle crawling near the steps. "3 conditions," she finally said, her voice precise and measured. David suppressed a smile at her negotiation tactic. It reminded him so much of Sarah. "I'm listening." 1. We leave food in 3 different places so he can find it easily. 2. We aren't gone longer than the big hand goes around the clock once. And 3. We bring back blueberries for him. He likes them. "I didn't know foxes ate blueberries," David said, genuinely surprised. Page 17 of Drive Perez's book says red foxes are omnivores. They eat fruits and berries when available. Lily's factual recitation was delivered without emotion, but David could see the slight relaxation of her shoulders, a sign she was working through her anxiety. "It's a deal," he said, holding out his hand. It was a gesture from their past, before the accident. They had always shaken on important agreements. David wasn't sure if she would remember, or if she would be willing to engage in the physical contact. To his surprise and joy, Lily briefly placed her small hand in his, giving it one precise shake before quickly withdrawing. Together, they prepared for their brief absence. David helped Lily arrange small piles of food in strategic locations, by the porch, near the edge of the forest, and one hidden in a hollow log that Rusty had been using as a play tunnel. Lily carefully folded Rusty's blanket and placed it in a sheltered spot under the porch steps, somewhere the fox could retreat to if threatened. Throughout their preparations, Rusty followed Lily with curious attention, as if understanding something unusual was happening. When the time came to leave, Lily knelt down and placed both hands on either side of the fox kit's face, an intimate gesture David had never seen her use before. "We'll be back soon," she told Rusty solemnly. "Stay close to the house. Don't go far into the woods." The fox kit stared back at her with equal intensity, then licked her nose once before bounding off to explore one of the food caches. The trip into town was tense at first. Lily sat rigid in her booster seat, her eyes fixed on the trees passing outside the truck window. David kept up a gentle stream of conversation, pointing out interesting sights along the way, though he wasn't sure how much Lily was actually processing. The town of Pine Hollow was small, just a few blocks of storefronts surrounding a central square. They hadn't visited since the first week after moving in, when David had needed to stock their pantry. He parked in front of the general store, which also served as a grocery for the small community. "Ready?" he asked, turning to Lily. She nodded once, unclipping her seatbelt with precise movements. David had prepared for this outing, bringing Lily's noise-canceling headphones in case the store became overwhelming, and he had a detailed list organized by store layout to make their shopping as efficient as possible. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, causing Lily to flinch slightly. David placed a reassuring hand near, but not touching, her shoulder. "We'll be quick," he promised. The store was relatively empty. Just an elderly couple examining the produce and a middle-aged man behind the counter reading a newspaper. David grabbed a basket and began efficiently selecting items from his list, while Lily stayed close, her gaze fixed on the floor tiles. "Morning," the man behind the counter called. "You folks must be the ones who moved into the old Collins place." David nodded, approaching the counter. "That's right. David Morgan, and this is my daughter Lily." "Frank Wilder," the man replied, offering his hand. "Run this place going on 30 years now. Don't get many newcomers out that way. Most folks prefer to be closer to town." David shook his hand briefly. "We were looking for some peace and quiet." Frank chuckled. "Well, you sure found it out there. Anything in particular you're looking for today?" "Actually, do you carry fresh blueberries?" They weren't in the produce section. "Bit early for local berries," Frank said, scratching his chin. "But my wife just put up some preserves from last season's batch. They're mighty good on pancakes." Lily, who had been scanning the store while half listening to the adults' conversation, suddenly tugged at David's sleeve. "Dad?" she whispered, pointing to a bulletin board near the entrance. David followed her gaze and felt his stomach tighten. Pinned to the board were several flyers, and one in particular stood out. A notice from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife warning about illegal trapping in protected forests, with a particular emphasis on snares that have been found in the area around Pine Creek Road. "Been having trouble with poachers," Frank explained, following their gaze. "Game warden's been trying to catch whoever's setting those traps for months now." "That's near our property," David said, moving closer to the bulletin board to read the details. The flyer mentioned that several animals had been found injured by illegal wire snares, and that residents should report any suspicious activity. "Dad," Lily's voice was urgent now. "Rusty got hurt in one of these traps. We need to go home." Frank's eyebrows rose. "Rusty? You folks got a dog." Before David could answer, Lily continued, her words tumbling out faster than usual. "He's a fox and he's hurt and alone, and there might be more traps, and we need to go now." David saw Frank's expression shift from friendly curiosity to something more complicated. "A fox, you say?" Frank exchanged a look with the elderly couple, who had paused their shopping to listen. "Wouldn't be a young red fox, would it?" David felt a prickle of unease. "Yes, actually. He was injured. My daughter's been helping him recover." Frank leaned forward on the counter. "Might want to be careful with that, Mr. Morgan. Mike Tanner's been searching all over for a fox that's been killing his chickens. He was in here yesterday saying he spotted a red one near the Collins place, your place, and was planning to set some traps." David felt Lily stiffen beside him. "Is that legal?" "The flyer says trapping is prohibited in that area." "Well, technically no," Frank admitted, lowering his voice. "But folks around here tend to handle predator problems themselves. Game warden can't be everywhere at once." "We need to go," Lily repeated, more urgently now. Her hands had begun flapping at her sides, a clear sign of her rising distress. "Rusty's in danger." David quickly placed his basket on the counter. "Just these items, please. We're in a bit of a hurry." As Frank rang up their purchases, the elderly woman approached hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentle. "Is your daughter the one Elena Perez mentioned? The one who's helping a fox kid?" David nodded cautiously, placing a steadying hand near Lily's shoulder. "I'm Martha Holloway," the woman said. "Elena is my niece. She told me about your girl's special connection with that fox. It's a beautiful thing." David felt a rush of gratitude at this unexpected ally. "Thank you. It's been quite remarkable to witness." Martha smiled warmly at Lily, who was now rocking slightly with anxiety. Your fox isn't the chicken killer, dear. Those attacks started months ago, long before your little friend was old enough to hunt on his own. I told Mike Tanner as much yesterday, but he's a stubborn man. We really need to go, Lily insisted, pulling at David's sleeve. Of course, David said, quickly paying for their groceries. Thank you for the information. As they hurried to the truck, David's mind raced. If this Mike Tanner was setting traps near their property, Rusty could be in serious danger. The Fox kid had likely been caught in a similar trap before, which explained his injury. What if he wandered into another one while they were away? Lily was silent during the drive home, but her body language spoke volumes. Her hands twisted together in her lap, her jaw clenched tight. David drove as quickly as safety allowed, the truck bouncing over the rutted dirt roads. When they finally pulled up to the cabin, Lily was out of her seat before David had fully stopped, racing toward the porch. Rusty, she called, her voice cracking with fear. Rusty, where are you? David left the groceries in the truck and followed quickly. The food they'd left out was gone, but there was no sign of Rusty. Lily ran to the edge of the property, scanning the forest with frantic eyes. He always comes when I call, she said, her voice rising in panic. Always. David felt fear crawling up his spine. Maybe he's just exploring, Lily. He is a wild animal. No, Lily shook her head vehemently. He knows our schedule. He knows when we're supposed to be here. She cupped her hands around her mouth and called again, louder this time. Rusty. They waited, the seconds stretching painfully, but the forest remained silent except for the occasional bird call. Lily's breathing became rapid and shallow, the beginning of what David recognized as a panic attack. He hadn't seen her have one since shortly after Sarah's death. We'll find him, David promised, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. Let's think about this logically. Where would he go if he was scared or if something happened? Lily's eyes widened. The den, she whispered. He showed me his den last week. He did? Where? In the hollow oak, past the creek. He wanted me to see it. David was momentarily taken aback. Lily hadn't mentioned venturing that far into the forest with Rusty. But this wasn't the time for parental concerns. Can you show me? Lily nodded and took off running toward the creek that cut through the property about 100 yards behind their cabin. David followed, trying to keep up while scanning the forest floor for any signs of traps or snares. The hollow oak was massive, probably hundreds of years old, with a large opening at its base partially concealed by ferns. Lily dropped to her knees in front of it. Rusty, she called, her voice softer now. Are you in there? It's me. David held his breath, willing the fox to appear. After what felt like eternity, there was a faint rustling from inside the hollow, and Rusty's pointed face cautiously emerged. He looked unharmed but visibly frightened, his ears flattened against his head. Oh, thank goodness, David breathed. Lily made a small sound of relief and reached out her hands. It's okay, Rusty. You're safe now. The fox kid hesitated, then darted forward into Lily's waiting arms, pressing his body against her chest. He was trembling, David noticed, and kept looking over his shoulder toward the deeper forest. Something scared him, Lily said, gently stroking Rusty's back. He's terrified. David scanned the surrounding forest, suddenly feeling exposed. Let's get back to the house, he said quietly. I don't like being out here with that Tanner guy possibly setting traps. As they began walking back toward the cabin, David noticed something that made his blood run cold. Fresh boot prints in the mud near the creek bank, too large to be Lily's and facing in the direction of the hollow oak. Someone had been here, and recently. Instinctively, David moved closer to Lily, who was cradling Rusty against her chest as they walked. The fox kit was still trembling, but seemed calmer in Lily's arms. I think we should call Dr. Perez, David said once they were safely back at the cabin. And maybe the game warden too. If someone's setting traps on our property, that's trespassing. Lily carried Rusty to the porch and settled on the steps, examining him carefully for any new injuries. He's okay, she reported after a thorough check. Just scared. David brought her a glass of water and the jar of blueberry preserves they'd purchased. Here, I think Rusty earned these today. Lily opened the jar and carefully extracted a single blueberry, offering it to Rusty on her palm. The fox sniffed it cautiously, then delicately took it from her hand, some of his usual spirit returning as he enjoyed the sweet treat. Inside the cabin, David called Dr. Perez and explained the situation. She listened carefully, then sighed. Mike Tanner has been a problem for years, she said. He's convinced predators are the reason his chicken operation isn't profitable, when the real issue is his substandard care. I'll call the game warden myself. We've been trying to catch him in the act of illegal trapping for months. Should we be worried? David asked, glancing out the window at Lily and Rusty on the porch. The fox was now lying beside her, his head resting on her leg as she stroked his ears. I think you should be cautious, Dr. Perez replied. Tanner is more bluster than action, but if he has identified your property as a fox habitat, he might come back. The game warden will make a visit to his farm today, but that might just agitate him further. After hanging up, David joined Lily on the porch, settling beside her but maintaining the space she preferred. Dr. Perez is going to help make sure Rusty stays safe, he explained. Lily nodded, her fingers continuing their gentle rhythm through Rusty's fur. We need to protect him. We will, David promised, though he wasn't entirely sure how. But Lily, I think we need to talk about something important. Lily's hand paused mid-stroke. About Rusty? Yes, David said gently. About what happens as he gets better and stronger. He stays with us, Lily said immediately. Her voice taking on the flat, non-negotiable tone that David recognized as a defense mechanism. Lily, you know that's not a... He needs me, she interrupted, her fingers resuming their movement through Rusty's fur. And I need him. David chose his next words carefully. I know how special Rusty is to you, and I see how much you've helped him. But foxes aren't meant to live with people. They need to be free to be what they really are. He is free, Lily insisted. He comes and goes. He has his den. He hunts sometimes. I've seen him catch mice. That's true, David acknowledged. But there's another problem. If people like Mike Tanner think Rusty is living here with us, they might think it's okay to trap or hurt other foxes. And it's actually against the law to keep a wild fox as a pet. Lily was silent for a long moment, processing this information. But we're not keeping him, she finally said. He's keeping us. The simple truth of her statement caught David off guard. In many ways, she was right. Rusty had chosen to form this bond with them, had sought them out in the first place. Before David could formulate a response, the sound of a vehicle rumbling down their driveway pulled his attention away. A large pickup truck was approaching, dust billowing behind its tires. Stay here with Rusty, David said, rising to his feet. Keep him close. The truck came to a stop, and a heavy-set man in his 50s climbed out. He wore mud-splattered work boots and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. His face was weathered and set in a grim expression. David walked down the porch steps to meet him, positioning himself between the visitor and Lily. Can I help you? The man's gaze traveled past David to where Lily sat with Rusty, who was now alert and watching intently. So it's true, he said, his voice gravelly and harsh. You got my fox. I'm David Morgan, David said, extending his hand in a deliberate attempt to establish civility. This is private property, Mr. Tanner. Mike Tanner. He ignored David's outstretched hand. And that's the fox that's been killing my chickens. Been tracking it for weeks." David lowered his hand, keeping his voice calm despite the tension. "I think you're mistaken. This fox kid is only a few months old. He wouldn't be able to take down a chicken, and he certainly couldn't have been doing so for weeks." Tanner snorted. "Shows what you know. All predators are the same killers by nature. That's what they do." Behind David, Lily stood up slowly, Rusty pressed protectively against her legs. "You're the one who hurt him," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "You put traps in the forest." Tanner's eyes narrowed. "Protecting my livelihood, girl. These hills were fine until city folks like you started moving in with your bleeding hearts." David felt anger rising within him, but he fought to maintain his composure. "Mr. Tanner, setting traps on protected forest land is illegal. So is trespassing on our property, which extends to the creek line. Laws made by people who've never had to work for a living," Tanner scoffed. "I've lived here 40 years. I know what's right." "What's right is leaving now," David replied, his patience wearing thin. "Dr. Perez and the game warden have been notified about illegal trapping in this area." At the mention of the game warden, Tanner's expression darkened. "You've made a mistake getting involved in things you don't understand, Morgan. That fox is a wild animal. It doesn't belong to you or your weird kid." David's hands clenched into fists at the insult to Lily, but before he could respond, the sound of another vehicle approaching caught their attention. A forest green truck with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife logo on the door came up the driveway, parking beside Tanner's pickup. A tall woman in a ranger's uniform stepped out, her expression stern as she surveyed the scene. "Afternoon, folks. I'm Ranger Jacobs. Got a call about some illegal trapping concerns." Her eyes settled on Tanner. "Mr. Tanner. Twice in one day. What a coincidence." Tanner's face flushed with anger. "Just having a neighborly chat." "Ranger, no law against that." "Indeed," Ranger Jacobs replied coolly. "Though I'm curious why this chat is happening right after I warned you about setting more traps on protected land." She turned to David. "Mr. Morgan, I'd like to speak with you about a report of injured wildlife on your property." David nodded, relief washing over him at the ranger's timely arrival. "Of course. My daughter has been helping a fox kit that was caught in what we believe was a snare or trap." Lily remained on the porch, one hand resting protectively on Rusty's back. The fox kit was now standing alert beside her, his tail bushed out in a display of anxiety. Ranger Jacobs approached the porch slowly, keeping her movements non-threatening. "Is that our patient?" she asked Lily gently. Lily nodded, her expression wary. "He's looking pretty good," the ranger observed. "You must be taking excellent care of him." "His name is Rusty," Lily said cautiously. "He was hurt, but I fixed him." Behind them, Tanner made a disgusted sound. "This is ridiculous. It's a pest, not a pet." Ranger Jacobs turned sharply. "Mr. Tanner, I suggest you return to your farm. We'll continue our conversation about those unauthorized traps tomorrow." For a moment, it seemed like Tanner might argue, but after glancing between the ranger's stern face and David's resolute stance, he backed down. "This isn't over," he muttered as he climbed into his truck. The engine roared to life, and he drove off, spraying gravel behind him. Once Tanner was gone, Ranger Jacobs' demeanor softened. "I apologize for that. Mike Tanner has been a thorn in our side for years, but he's mostly talk." "Mostly?" David asked, concerned. "The ranger's side. He's been warned repeatedly about illegal trapping. We've never caught him red-handed, but the evidence suggests he's responsible for several injuries to protected wildlife, including what may have happened to your fox friend there." Ranger Jacobs glanced at David, then back to Lily. "That's an important distinction. As long as he's free to come and go, and as long as you're not trying to domesticate him, we can work with this unusual situation." She stood up and turned to David. "I'd like to check the property for traps, if that's all right with you. There's a good chance Tanner has set some in the area." "Of course," David agreed readily. "Whatever you need to do." As Ranger Jacobs began her inspection of the property, David sat beside Lily on the porch steps, watching as Rusty cautiously explored the yard again, his confidence gradually returning now that the threats had departed. "He was really scared, Dad," Lily said quietly. "I felt it. I think Mr. Tanner was in the woods when we were gone." David nodded, suspecting she was right. "Ranger Jacobs will help keep him safe now, and we'll be more careful too." Lily's hand reached out hesitantly, hovering near David's arm without touching it. "Thank you for protecting us." The simple gesture and her words filled David's heart with a bittersweet warmth. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like a father again, not just a caretaker struggling to connect with his grieving daughter, but a protector, a guide, a true parent. "Always," he promised softly. "Always." Summer slipped gently into fall, painting the Oregon forest in brilliant hues of gold and crimson. 3 months had passed since Rusty first appeared at the Morgan cabin, and the changes in both fox and child were remarkable. Rusty had grown significantly, his once small frame now lanky and adolescent, his coat thicker and more vibrant in preparation for the coming winter. The wound on his leg had healed completely, leaving only a small patch of fur that grew in a different direction, a permanent reminder of how he and Lily had found each other. Lily, too, had transformed. The silent, withdrawn child who had arrived at the cabin was now talkative and engaged, at least when it came to Rusty and the forest. She still struggled with social interaction and sensory overload, but her world had expanded beyond the tight cocoon of grief she'd built around herself. She had even started video sessions with a new therapist who specialized in nature-based approaches for children with autism, a connection Dr. Perez had helped arrange. David watched from the kitchen window as Lily and Rusty played their morning game of hide-and-seek among the fallen leaves. Rusty would disappear into the underbrush, and Lily would call for him, pretending not to know where he was hiding until he would burst out, often startling her into rare, precious laughter. Despite the idyllic scene, David couldn't ignore the growing concern in the back of his mind. Rusty was no longer the injured kid they had rescued. He was maturing into an adult fox with adult instincts. Though he still returned to Lily each day, his absences were growing longer. Sometimes he wouldn't appear until late afternoon, and occasionally he brought evidence of his developing hunting skills. Once a field mouse, once a rabbit, proud offerings that Lily accepted with solemn dignity, though she discreetly asked David to bury them afterward. The phone rang, pulling David from his thoughts. It was Dr. Perez, who had become a regular visitor and supporter of their unusual situation. "Good morning, David. How are our favorite fox whisperers today?" "Morning, Elena. They're good playing outside right now." He leaned against the counter, watching as Rusty pounced on a pile of leaves, sending them scattering into the air. "Rusty's getting bigger every day. That's actually why I'm calling," Elena said, her tone shifting slightly. "I've been consulting with Ranger Jacobs about Rusty's development. We're a bit concerned about the upcoming winter." David felt a familiar tightness in his chest. "The winter? Why?" "Foxes his age should be establishing territory and preparing a permanent den for the winter months," Elena explained. "From what you've described, Rusty is still dividing his time between the wild and your property. That might become problematic when food gets scarce and temperatures drop. But he has his den in the hollow oak," David said. "And Lily's been researching what foxes eat in winter. She's already planning to supplement his diet." There was a pause on the line. "David, I know how much Rusty means to Lily, and I've supported this extraordinary relationship from the beginning. But we need to consider what's best for Rusty as a wild animal. You're saying he might not survive the winter, David said, turning away from the window so Lily wouldn't see his expression. I'm saying he's caught between two worlds, Elena replied gently. He hasn't fully developed the skills to be independent in the wild, but he's also not a domestic animal. The sanctuary I mentioned months ago, Wild Heart Reserve, has experts who specialize in cases exactly like his. David ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the impossible decision looming before him. Lily won't understand. She thinks Rusty is thriving exactly as he is. I know, Elena said, sympathy evident in her voice. But there's another concern. Tanner hasn't given up. Ranger Jacobs found 2 more illegal snares last week, closer to your property line than before. He's been quieter since her warning, but he's still a threat. Outside, Lily had found a pine cone and was showing it to Rusty, explaining something with animated hand gestures. The fox sat attentively before her, head tilted as if absorbing every word. What would this sanctuary be like? David asked, the words difficult to form. It's beautiful, 300 acres of protected land with naturalistic enclosures. Rusty would have other foxes for company, expert care, and protection from predators and humans like Tanner. They even have programs where regular visitors can observe from a distance. Lily could still see him, just differently. She'll feel like we're abandoning him, David said, voicing his greatest fear. After everything she's been through with her mom's death. I don't know if she can handle another loss. I understand, David, I really do, Elena said. But I've been where you are. When I was in vet school, I rehabilitated a hawk with a broken wing. I kept it too long, became too attached. When I finally released it, it couldn't hunt effectively. It didn't survive the week. She paused. I don't want that for Rusty, and I don't want that heartbreak for Lily. After ending the call, David stood at the window for a long time, watching Lily and Rusty's joyful play. How could he possibly explain this to his daughter? How could he make her understand that sometimes the best way to love something was to let it go? He was still lost in these thoughts when a knock at the door startled him. Opening it, he found Ranger Jacobs on the porch, her expression serious. Mr. Morgan, she said with a nod. Sorry to drop by unannounced. I was patrolling the area and wanted to check in. No problem, David replied, stepping aside to let her in. And please, call me David. The ranger stepped into the cabin, removing her hat. I've been meaning to speak with you about Rusty. I assume Dr. Perez has already called. David nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat at the small kitchen table. Just now, actually. About the winter and the sanctuary. Ranger Jacobs sat down, placing her hat on the table. I've been monitoring Rusty's development since I first met him. He's growing well, but I'm concerned about his survival skills. He hunts, David pointed out. He brought Lily a rabbit last week. That's encouraging, she acknowledged. But there's more to survival than hunting. There's shelter building, predator avoidance, territory defense. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. Winter in these mountains is brutal, David. Even fully wild foxes with proper training from their parents have a high mortality rate their first year. Outside, Lily had noticed the ranger's truck and was watching the house curiously, Rusty at her side. There's also the legal aspect, Ranger Jacobs continued. So far, I've been able to classify this as a temporary wildlife rehabilitation situation with Dr. Perez's professional oversight. But as Rusty matures, that classification becomes harder to justify. And if Tanner reports us? David asked. It could get complicated, she admitted. While Rusty does come and go freely, the level of interaction he has with Lily is technically beyond what's legally permitted for wildlife. The front door opened, and Lily stepped inside, her cheeks flushed from the cool autumn air. Rusty remained on the porch, watching through the screen door. "Why is Ranger Jacobs here?" Lily asked, her tone wary. "Is something wrong with Rusty?" David exchanged a glance with the ranger, then turned to his daughter. "Lily, Ranger Jacobs is just checking in on Rusty's progress. She's been helping keep him safe, remember?" Lily's eyes narrowed slightly. She had always been perceptive about adult conversations that concerned her. "You're talking about taking him away, aren't you?" Ranger Jacobs stood up slowly. "Not exactly, Lily. I'm concerned about Rusty's ability to survive the winter. It gets very cold here, and food becomes scarce. We can feed him," Lily said immediately. "I've been researching fox diets. They eat berries and insects and small mammals in winter. We can supplement with chicken and eggs." "It's more complicated than that," the ranger explained gently. "Rusty needs to learn many skills to survive in the wild, and he's running out of time to learn them. There's a place called Wild Heart Reserve where he could be safe and have everything he needs." Lily's hands began to flap at her sides, a clear sign of rising distress. "No," she said, her voice rising. "No sanctuary. Rusty stays here. He's learning. I'm teaching him." David moved toward his daughter, stopping at the distance she preferred. "Lily, we need to think about what's best for Rusty. This is best for him," she insisted, tears forming in her eyes. "He's happy here. He comes back every day because he wants to." Through the screen door, Rusty was growing agitated, responding to Lily's distress. He pawed at the door, making soft whining sounds. Ranger Jacobs approached carefully. "Lily, I can see how much you love Rusty and how much he cares for you. That's why we need to consider his future carefully. Would you be willing to at least visit the sanctuary with your dad? Just to see what it's like?" Lily's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow. "You'll take him while we're gone. You'll trick us." "I promise that won't happen," Ranger Jacobs said firmly. "This would just be a visit. No decisions would be made without involving you." David recognized the signs of an impending meltdown, Lily's first in months. "Maybe we should continue this conversation another time," he suggested to the ranger. Ranger Jacobs nodded, recognizing the situation. "Of course. I'll go now, but please think about what I've said. And call me if you have any questions or concerns." As soon as the ranger left, Lily rushed to the door and flung it open. Rusty immediately pressed against her legs, looking up at her with concern in his bright eyes. Lily dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his fur. "No one's taking you away," she whispered fiercely. "I won't let them." David stood helplessly by, his heart breaking as he watched his daughter cling to the fox as if her life depended on it. In many ways, it did. Rusty had been the bridge that led Lily back from the depths of her grief, the connection that helped her find her voice again. The thought of separating them felt cruel, even if it might be necessary. That night, after Lily had finally fallen asleep, but only after extracting numerous promises from David that Rusty wouldn't be taken away, David sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring into the darkness of the forest. To his surprise, Rusty appeared from the shadows and sat beside him, an unusual occurrence as the fox generally avoided being alone with him. "Hey, buddy," David said softly. "You've certainly caused quite a stir around here." Rusty tilted his head, his amber eyes reflecting the porch light. Despite months of interaction, David still found it unnerving how intelligent those eyes seemed, how they appeared to understand far more than any wild animal should. "What am I supposed to do here?" David asked, not expecting an answer but needing to voice his conflict. "Lily needs you. God knows you've helped her more than therapy or time or anything else I've tried. But what happens when winter comes? What happens if you can't find enough food? Or if Tanner sets more traps? Or if he gets sick?" Rusty watched him steadily, ears perked forward as if listening intently. "And what happens to Lily if something happens to you?" David continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She's already lost her mother. I don't think she could bear losing you too." The fox shifted, placing one paw delicately on David's knee, an unprecedented gesture that left him momentarily speechless. For a brief, irrational moment, David could almost believe that Rusty was trying to reassure him, to communicate in the only way he could. The moment was interrupted by the sound of Lily's bedroom window sliding open. "Dad," her voice called, tinged with panic. "Where's Rusty?" "He's right here with me," David called back. "We're just having a little chat." "Tell him to come inside," Lily said, her voice betraying her fear. "Please." Rusty needed no further prompting. He immediately rose and trotted to the front door, waiting to be let in. David opened it, and the fox slipped inside, heading straight for Lily's room. David followed, stopping in the hallway outside his daughter's bedroom. Through the partially open door, he could see Rusty jump onto Lily's bed and curl up beside her, his tail draping protectively over her arm. Lily's face was tear-stained, but as she stroked Rusty's fur, her breathing steadied and her expression relaxed. "Promise we'll stay together," she whispered to the fox. "Promise." Rusty responded by pressing his head under her chin, a gesture of affection that David had witnessed many times over the past months. It never failed to amaze him how the wild animals seemed to understand exactly what Lily needed, how to comfort her in ways that even David, with all his love and good intentions, couldn't quite manage. David retreated quietly to his own room, the weight of the impossible decision even heavier on his shoulders. There seemed to be no right answer, no path forward that wouldn't cause pain to someone he cared about, whether his daughter or the remarkable fox that had changed their lives. The next morning brought the first frost of the season, a glittering sheen across the grass and a sharp bite to the air that hadn't been there before. David found Lily and Rusty already outside, the fox investigating the frost with curious paws while Lily watched, wrapped in her warmest coat. "It's getting colder," David commented as he joined her, offering a mug of hot chocolate. Lily accepted it without looking at him, her eyes still fixed on Rusty. "Winter is coming," she said, repeating a phrase she must have heard from the ranger or Dr. Perez. "But we'll be fine. We have a plan." "What plan is that?" David asked, careful to keep his tone neutral. "Rusty can stay in the cabin when it's too cold. I've been working on a special place for him in my room, and I've marked all the places in the forest where berries and nuts grow. We can visit them together when he needs food." David took a deep breath. "Lily, I think we should visit that sanctuary Ranger Jacobs mentioned, just to see it. No decisions, just information." Lily stiffened. "I don't want to." "I know," David said gently. "But sometimes we need to do things that are hard because they might be important. Remember how you didn't want to try video therapy, but now you like talking to Dr. Bennett?" Lily considered this, her analytical mind working through the comparison. "That's different," she finally said, but her voice held less conviction than before. "Just a visit," David repeated. "We'll go together, and we'll come home together. And you can ask as many questions as you want about how they care for the animals." Lily was silent for a long moment, watching as Rusty pounced on a frosted leaf, sending crystals of ice scattering into the air. "Will Rusty come with us?" David hesitated. "I don't think that would be a good idea. He might get scared in the car or at a new place. But we'll come right back to him, I promise." Lily's fingers began to twist the hem of her coat, another self-soothing gesture. "When? This weekend, maybe? I'll need to call and make arrangements." She nodded once, reluctantly. For conditions, she said, falling back into their familiar negotiation pattern. I'm listening, David replied, relieved that she was at least considering the visit. 1. We're gone for less than 3 hours total. 2. Dr. Perez stays here with Rusty while we're gone. 3. I get to talk to the people who take care of the animals. And 4. I get the final decision about what happens to Rusty. The last condition gave David pause. He couldn't honestly promise Lily complete control over Rusty's future, not when there were legal considerations and Rusty's own well-being to consider. But he recognized the importance of respecting her agency in this deeply personal matter. How about this? He countered carefully. Your opinion will be the most important one we consider, and we'll make the decision together as a family. I promise to really listen to your thoughts and feelings. Lily thought about this, her brow furrowed in concentration. And you promise we'll come right back after visiting? Absolutely, David said firmly. We'll go, we'll look, we'll ask questions, and we'll come home to think about it. After another long moment, Lily nodded. Okay, but I still think Rusty should stay with us. David reached out and placed his hand near, but not touching, Lily's shoulder. His own version of the reassurance she could accept. I know you do, sweet pea. I know. Later that day, while Lily was teaching Rusty a new game involving hiding small objects and finding them by scent, David called Dr. Perez to update her on the situation and arrange for her to stay with Rusty during their visit to the sanctuary. Of course I'll stay with him, Elena assured him. And I think you're making the right decision, David. Just seeing the sanctuary might help Lily understand that it could be a good option for Rusty. I hope so, David replied, watching through the window as Lily praised Rusty for finding a small toy she'd hidden in the leaves. But I'm not going to force her. She's been through too much already. I understand. But consider this. What if Rusty doesn't come back one day? What if something happens to him in the forest, or if Tanner? She didn't finish the thought. I know, David said quietly. Believe me, I've thought about it. That might be even more devastating for her than a planned transition. The weekend arrived with a crisp clarity typical of October in the mountains. David and Lily prepared for their visit to the sanctuary, packing snacks and water for the hour-long drive. Dr. Perez arrived early, bringing with her a new toy for Rusty, a puzzle that would release treats when manipulated correctly. This will keep him busy while you're gone, she explained to Lily. And I'll stay right here with him the whole time. Lily nodded, though she kept glancing anxiously at Rusty, who seemed to sense that something unusual was happening. He stayed closer to her than normal, occasionally pressing his body against her legs as if reassuring himself of her presence. When the time came to leave, Lily knelt beside Rusty, placing her hands on either side of his face as she often did during important moments. We'll be back soon, she promised him. Dr. Perez will stay with you. We're just going to look at this place, but then we're coming home. I promise. Rusty licked her cheek once, then settled beside Dr. Perez, watching intently as Lily and David walked to the truck. As they drove away, David couldn't help noticing how Lily twisted in her seat to keep Rusty in view until the cabin disappeared around a bend in the road. The drive to Wild Heart Reserve was mostly silent. Lily stared out the window, occasionally reciting facts about fox behavior or winter survival strategies, as if arming herself with information for the discussion she knew was coming. David let her be, understanding that this was her way of processing anxiety. Wild Heart Reserve was tucked into a valley surrounded by forested hills. A tasteful wooden sign marked the entrance, and as they drove up the winding road, they caught glimpses of naturalistic enclosures built to blend with the landscape. The main building was a rustic lodge constructed of local timber and stone, with large windows overlooking the valley. A woman in her 40s with a silver-streaked braid and kind eyes met them at the door. "You must be the Morgans," she said warmly. "I'm Dr. Isabel Chin, the lead wildlife biologist here. Welcome to Wild Heart." David shook her hand, then gestured to Lily, who stood slightly behind him, her posture tense. "This is my daughter, Lily. She's the one who's been caring for Rusty." Dr. Chin crouched down to Lily's eye level, but maintained a respectful distance. "I've heard wonderful things about you and Rusty, Lily. Dr. Perez told me how you helped heal his leg when he was injured." Lily didn't respond immediately, her eyes scanning the building and grounds with precise attention to detail. Finally, she asked, "Do the animals here have enough space?" Dr. Chin smiled at the directness of the question. "That's an excellent first question. Would you like to see for yourself? We can start with our fox habitat." She led them through the building and out onto a network of paths that wound between various naturalistic enclosures. Some housed injured deer, others contained rehabilitating birds of prey, and one large space was dedicated to a family of raccoons. Dr. Chin explained that many of the animals were recovering from injuries with the goal of eventual release, while others would remain permanent residents due to disabilities that would prevent survival in the wild. Finally, they arrived at a spacious enclosure nestled against a hillside. At first glance, it appeared to be simply a section of forest, but David noticed the nearly invisible mesh fencing that enclosed the space, extending several feet underground to prevent digging and arching overhead to prevent escape. "This is our fox habitat," Dr. Chin explained. "It's designed to mimic their natural environment while keeping them safe from predators, dangerous weather, and human threats like illegal trapping." Lily approached the fence, her eyes scanning the enclosure intently. "Where are the foxes?" "They're likely resting in one of the dens right now," Dr. Chin replied. "We have 3 red foxes currently in residence, all of them rescues who couldn't be released for various reasons. They have multiple den sites, climbing structures, puzzle feeders for mental stimulation, and natural prey-like feeding patterns." As if on cue, a russet form emerged from beneath a fallen log, an adult fox with a magnificent coat and bright, alert eyes. It moved with a slight limp but otherwise appeared healthy and well-adjusted. The fox noticed them and observed curiously from a safe distance. "That's Ember," Dr. Chin said softly. "She was hit by a car last year and lost function in one of her back legs. She can't run fast enough to hunt effectively in the wild, but she gets around just fine here." Lily watched Ember with rapt attention. "Does she have friends?" "Yes," Dr. Chin smiled. "She shares this habitat with 2 other foxes, though they often keep to themselves during the day. They're most active at dawn and dusk, which is natural for foxes." "Can they leave if they want to?" Lily asked, her fingers clutching the fence lightly. Dr. Chin's expression grew serious. "No, they can't. And that's an important thing for you to understand, Lily. Once an animal comes here, they remain in our care. It's different from what Rusty has with you right now, where he can come and go." Lily's face fell slightly. "So he would be in a cage. A big one, but still a cage." "In a way, yes," Dr. Chin acknowledged. "But it's also a safe haven. Many of our foxes wouldn't survive a week in the wild. They would starve, be killed by predators, or encounter humans who might harm them." "Rusty is smart," Lily insisted. "He knows how to hunt now. He brings me mice sometimes." Dr. Chin nodded. "That's impressive. But hunting small prey is just one skill foxes need. They also need to know how to avoid coyotes, how to find shelter in severe weather, how to defend territory from other foxes." Lily was silent, absorbing this information with the intense focus David had come to recognize when she was processing difficult concepts. "Would you like to see where he would sleep if he came here?" Dr. Chin offered gently. Lily nodded, and they followed Dr. Chin along a path that circled behind the enclosure. She showed them the heated den boxes built into the hillside, the fresh water systems, and the staff observation area where caretakers could monitor the animals without disturbing them. "We have veterinarians on staff who check each animal regularly," Dr. Chin explained. "And we have interns who create enrichment activities to keep their minds stimulated. Nothing is as good as true freedom, of course, but for animals that can't survive in the wild, we try to make this the next best thing." As they completed their tour, Dr. Chin led them to a small meeting room with large windows overlooking the fox habitat. "Do you have any questions for me, Lily? Anything at all about how we care for our animals?" Lily sat down at the table, her hands folded precisely in front of her. Would Rusty be allowed to have his blue blanket if he came here? The question, so simple yet so poignant, made David's throat tighten with emotion. Dr. Chin's expression softened. "Yes, he could have his blanket. We often provide familiar comfort items to help animals transition to their new environment." "What about visits?" David asked. "If Rusty were to come here, could Lily visit him?" "Absolutely," Dr. Chin confirmed. "We have a visitor program for the families who have donated animals to our care. You could schedule regular visits, though the interaction would be different than what you're used to. There would need to be a barrier, and as time passes, Rusty might become more integrated with the other foxes and less focused on human interaction." Lily's fingers began to tap rhythmically on the table. "Would he forget me?" Dr. Chin considered her answer carefully. "I don't think he would forget you, Lily. Animals remember important connections, but his behavior might change as he adapts to life here. He might become more fox-like and less like the companion you know now." Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing this difficult truth. Then she asked, "What happens if we don't bring him here? If he stays with us?" "That's a complex question," Dr. Chin replied honestly. "He might be fine, especially with the care and attention you've given him. Many red foxes do survive their first winter, but there are significant risks: predators, extreme weather, food scarcity, and people like the trapper you've encountered." She paused, then added gently, "There's also the question of what's best for Rusty's development. Foxes are wild animals with instincts and needs that are very different from domestic pets. The more comfortable he becomes with humans, the less likely he is to develop the skills and behaviors he needs for a truly healthy life." David watched his daughter's face, seeing the conflict of emotions playing across her usually controlled expression. This was exactly what he had feared, the impossible choice between what might be best for Rusty's physical safety and what seemed best for both Lily and Rusty's emotional well-being. After a few more questions about daily care routines and feeding schedules, Lily announced that she was ready to leave. She thanked Dr. Chin politely but formally, the way she did when she was trying to maintain control in overwhelming situations. The drive home was even quieter than the journey there. Lily stared out the window, occasionally wiping away a tear that she tried to hide from David. He let her process in silence, knowing that pushing for conversation would only increase her stress. When they pulled into their driveway, Lily was out of her seat before David had fully stopped the truck, rushing toward the cabin where Dr. Perez waited on the porch. "Where's Rusty?" Lily called, her voice tight with anxiety. "He's inside," Dr. Perez assured her with a smile. "He's been waiting by the door for the last hour, as if he knew you were coming back." Lily rushed inside, and David heard her exclamation of relief followed by the familiar sounds of her reunion with Rusty, her soft voice murmuring reassurances, the slight thump as the fox pressed against her legs. "How did it go?" Dr. Perez asked quietly as David approached the porch. "About as well as could be expected," he sighed. "The sanctuary is beautiful, and Dr. Chin was fantastic with Lily. But the reality of what it would mean to place Rusty there, It's going to be a difficult decision." Dr. Perez nodded sympathetically. "Did Lily ask good questions?" "Very good ones," David confirmed. "Direct and practical, focused on Rusty's well-being. She's taking this seriously, even though it's breaking her heart." Inside the cabin, Lily had settled on the floor with Rusty, who was investigating her thoroughly, sniffing her clothes and hair as if cataloging where she had been. She was speaking to him in a low, intent voice, and David caught fragments of her conversation, descriptions of the sanctuary, the other foxes, the den boxes with their warm straw. "I need to get going," Dr. Perez said, gathering her things. "But call me when you're ready to talk about next steps. And remember, David, there's no perfect solution here. Whatever you decide, what matters most is that both Lily and Rusty are approached with compassion." After Dr. Perez left, David joined Lily in the living room, settling into his armchair while she continued her reunion with Rusty on the rug. "What did you think of Wild Heart?" he asked gently. Lily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers methodically stroking Rusty's back. "It's nice," she finally said. "The foxes have space, and dens, and Dr. Chen seems kind." "But," David prompted, hearing the unspoken reservation in her voice. "But it's not freedom," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rusty wouldn't be able to choose anymore. He'd be safe, but he'd be trapped." David nodded, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. "That's a fair observation. It's a difficult balance between safety and freedom." Lily looked up at him, her eyes swimming with tears that she was desperately trying to control. "I don't know what to do, Dad. I don't want Rusty to get hurt, but I don't want him to be in a cage either." The raw emotion in her voice broke David's heart. He moved from the chair to the floor, sitting near Lily but maintaining the distance she needed. "I know, sweet pea. It's one of those impossible choices where there's no perfect answer. What would Mom say?" Lily asked suddenly, catching David off guard. She so rarely spoke of Sarah directly that the question momentarily stunned him. David took a deep breath, trying to truly consider what Sarah would have advised. "Your mom believed very strongly in respecting the natural world," he said slowly. "She thought wild animals should be wild whenever possible, but she also believed in kindness and compassion above all else." Rusty, seeming to sense the emotional weight of the conversation, pressed closer to Lily, resting his head on her knee. Lily looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "I need to think," she announced, her voice steadier now. "Like Dr. Bennett taught me. Weigh the options logically and consider all perspectives." David nodded, a surge of pride cutting through his concern. Despite everything, his daughter was approaching this heart-wrenching decision with remarkable maturity. "That sounds like a good plan. There's no rush. We have time to think about what's best." Lily gathered Rusty close, burying her face in his fur for a moment. When she looked up, her expression was solemn but composed. "I'm going to take Rusty outside to play. He needs exercise after being inside all day." "Of course," David said, recognizing her need for space. "I'll start making dinner." From the kitchen window, David watched as Lily and Rusty ventured into the yard. Their familiar play routine began, Rusty darting through the fallen leaves, Lily calling softly as she searched for him, the fox's surprise appearances that always made her smile despite herself. But there was a new quality to their interaction now, a poignancy that hadn't been there before, as if both girl and fox somehow understood that change was coming, whether they chose it or not. That night, as darkness fell over the forest, the first snow of the season began, not the heavy blanket of winter yet, but a gentle warning of what was to come. Tiny flakes swirled in the porch light as Lily stood at the door, Rusty beside her, both watching the transformation of their world. "Winter is coming," Lily whispered, repeating her earlier observation. But this time, the words carried the weight of understanding, of recognition that the decision couldn't be postponed indefinitely. Nature itself was forcing their hand. Rusty pressed against Lily's side, his warm fur a stark contrast to the cold air swirling in through the open door. His golden eyes reflected the soft light from inside the cabin, watching the snow with the same focused attention as the girl beside him. David approached quietly, carrying a mug of hot chocolate topped with the mini marshmallows that Lily preferred. "It's getting cold, sweet pea. Maybe you should close the door." Lily accepted the mug but continued watching the snow. "Do you think Rusty knows what snow is? Has he seen it before?" "Probably not," David replied. "He would have been too young last winter to remember it. This will be his first real snow experience." Lily considered this, sipping her hot chocolate thoughtfully. He'll need to learn about it. How to walk in it. How to find food when everything is covered. David recognized the mental calculations happening behind his daughter's solemn expression, the weighing of risks and benefits. The struggle between protecting Rusty and respecting his wild nature. It was a process he had been through himself many times in the past weeks. "Whatever we decide," David said gently, "we'll do it because we love him. Sometimes loving something means making hard choices." Lily's eyes met his briefly, then returned to the gently falling snow. "Like when Mom decided to swerve to save the deer?" The comparison stole David's breath away. Sarah's split-second decision to avoid hitting a deer had cost her life but had saved Lily. It was a sacrifice born of instinct and love, impossible to regret yet devastating in its consequences. "Yes," David managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mom made a choice to protect something vulnerable, even though it was hard." Lily nodded slowly, processing this connection. "I need to think about what's best for Rusty, not just what I want." "That's very wise," David said softly, pride swelling in his chest despite the ache of the situation. "And I promise, whatever we decide, we'll face it together." Rusty, perhaps sensing the emotional currents swirling around him, pressed his muzzle into Lily's hand. She set down her mug and knelt beside him, whispering something into his ear that David couldn't hear. It was a private moment between girl and fox, a communion that transcended the usual boundaries between human and wild animal. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. Winter had arrived, bringing with it the moment of decision that could no longer be delayed. The morning after the first snowfall, Lily woke early. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the transformed landscape with quiet intensity. The forest had changed overnight, draped in white that softened every edge and branch. In the pristine snow covering their yard, she could see tracks, the distinctive paw prints of a fox, circling the cabin before heading into the trees. Rusty had been out exploring this new world. Lily dressed quickly, pulling on her warmest clothes and winter boots. She found her father already in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, his own gaze fixed on the fox tracks outside. "He's curious about the snow," David said as Lily joined him at the window. "Learning about it." Lily nodded. "I want to follow his tracks. See where he went." David hesitated, glancing at the thermometer mounted outside the kitchen window. "It's pretty cold out there, Lily." "I'll wear my hat and mittens," she replied. "I need to see, Dad. Please." Something in her voice, a new maturity, a resonance of determination, made David relent. "All right, but bundle up properly. And don't go too far into the woods." Lily zipped her coat and pulled on her mittens, her movements deliberate and focused. Outside, the cold air bit at her cheeks, but she barely noticed as she began following Rusty's tracks across the yard. The prints were clear and precise, for neat pads with slight claw marks at the tips, a pattern she had studied in Dr. Perez's book about foxes. The tracks led toward the creek, then followed it for a while before veering into the forest. Lily paused at the edge of the trees, remembering her father's warning not to go too far. But the trail of paw prints drew her forward, each one a piece of the story she needed to understand. The forest was hushed under its blanket of snow, the usual rustling and chirping muted into a profound stillness. Lily moved carefully, her own footsteps crunching loudly in the quiet. Rusty's tracks showed him stopping frequently to investigate something beneath the snow, probably searching for mice or voles hiding in the tunnels beneath the white surface. As she followed the meandering path, Lily noticed something that made her heart both swell and ache. Rusty was practicing. His tracks showed him pouncing in the classic fox hunting leap, diving nose first into the snow to catch prey hiding beneath. Sometimes there were slight disturbances showing he had caught something. Other times the snow was merely dented from an unsuccessful attempt. He was teaching himself to survive in winter. Eventually, the tracks led to the hollow oak, Rusty's den. Outside the entrance were more tracks, and Lily noticed with interest that the snow had been deliberately cleared away from the opening, creating a small, bare patch of earth. Rusty had been preparing his home for winter. Lily crouched down near the den, not too close, respecting it as Rusty's private space. "Rusty," she called softly. "Are you in there?" For a moment, there was no response. Then a russet face appeared in the shadows of the hollow, amber eyes blinking in the bright morning light. Rusty emerged cautiously, his coat fluffed against the cold, looking more wild and fox-like than ever. But when he recognized Lily, his demeanor shifted. His ears perked forward, and he trotted to her side, pressing against her leg in greeting. Lily knelt in the snow, uncaring of the cold seeping through her pants, and wrapped her arms around his warm body. "You're learning about winter," she whispered into his fur. "You're so smart." Rusty pulled back slightly, his nose twitching as he studied her face. There was something different in his gaze today, a wildness, an alertness that seemed more pronounced than before. Lily recognized it with a clarity that both pained and reassured her. This was Rusty's true nature emerging, the wild fox beneath the companion he had become. Together, they walked back toward the cabin, Rusty darting ahead occasionally to investigate something beneath the snow, but always returning to Lily's side. As they neared the yard, Lily spotted her father standing on the porch, watching them. His expression was a mixture of concern and something else, a sad kind of pride that Lily was beginning to understand. "I found him at his den," Lily announced as they approached. "He was practicing hunting in the snow." David nodded. "I saw his tracks. He's been busy this morning." Rusty bounded ahead into the yard, pouncing playfully on a snow-covered pine cone. The sight was so joyful, so purely wild, that Lily felt her heart constrict. She stood watching him, her mind working through the complex thoughts and feelings that had been building since their visit to the sanctuary. "Dad," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I need to talk to you about Rusty." Inside, with mugs of hot chocolate warming their hands, Lily and David sat at the kitchen table. Rusty had settled on the rug nearby, grooming the snow from his fur with methodical attention. "I've been thinking about what's best for Rusty," Lily began, her gaze fixed on the fox rather than her father. "About the sanctuary, and winter, and everything." David waited patiently, giving her the space to find her words in her own way. "He's learning how to hunt in the snow," Lily continued. "His instincts are working. But Dr. Chen said that might not be enough." She took a sip of her hot chocolate, organizing her thoughts before speaking again. "I don't want him to be in a cage, even a big one. But I don't want him to die because I was selfish." David's heart swelled with both pride and sorrow at his daughter's maturity. "That's a very thoughtful perspective, Lily. What do you think we should do?" Lily was quiet for a long moment, watching as Rusty finished his grooming and stretched out on the rug, his eyes half closed in contentment. I want to talk to Dr. Perez again. And Ranger Jacobs. I want to know if there's another option. What kind of option are you thinking about? David asked. Something in between, Lily said thoughtfully. Not a cage, but not just letting him go either. Something that helps him be wild but still keeps him safe. David considered this, surprised and impressed by his daughter's ability to seek a nuanced solution. That's a great idea. Let me call them and see if they can come over to talk about possibilities. Later that afternoon, Dr. Perez and Ranger Jacobs arrived at the cabin. They settled in the living room, where Rusty observed the gathering with curious attention, occasionally shifting position to stay near Lily but maintaining a new watchfulness that hadn't been present before. Lily has been thinking about Rusty's future, David explained after everyone was seated. She has some questions about whether there might be options beyond the sanctuary or simply letting Rusty remain completely wild. Dr. Perez smiled encouragingly at Lily. What kind of options are you imagining, Lily? Lily took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to control their nervous movement. I was thinking maybe there could be a way to help Rusty learn to be more wild, but still make sure he's safe. Like training him instead of caging him. Ranger Jacobs leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. That's an interesting approach. We do sometimes use a method called soft release with rehabilitated wildlife, where we gradually reduce human contact while providing some support during the transition period. Yes, Lily nodded eagerly. Like that. Rusty is already learning to hunt in the snow. I saw him practicing this morning, but maybe he needs help with other things. Dr. Perez and Ranger Jacobs exchanged glances. What Lily's suggesting does have merit, Dr. Perez said thoughtfully. Rusty has retained more of his wild instincts than I initially expected. If we could build on that foundation while still providing some safety measures. It would be unconventional, Ranger Jacobs cautioned. But Rusty's entire situation has been unconventional from the start. She turned to Lily. What specific help do you think he might need? Lily considered the question seriously. He needs to know about predators, how to avoid coyotes and bigger animals. And he needs a safer den for winter, with emergency food nearby in case hunting gets hard. And she hesitated. He needs to know that Tanner is dangerous. The adults in the room were silent for a moment, struck by the practical wisdom in the child's assessment. Those are all excellent points, Ranger Jacobs said finally. I could potentially help with creating a more secure den site on your property, something that would offer better protection from the elements while still being natural. And I could assist with a supplemental feeding program, Dr. Perez added. Not enough to make him dependent, but strategic caches that could help during the harshest weather. David, who had been listening thoughtfully, added, what about the legal aspects? Would this approach still comply with wildlife regulations? Ranger Jacobs nodded slowly. Since Rusty would remain a wild animal, not a pet, and the goal would be to encourage his natural behaviors rather than domesticate him, I believe we could classify this as an approved wildlife rehabilitation project, especially since Dr. Perez is involved in a professional capacity. Lily, who had been watching Rusty during this conversation, asked the question that clearly worried her most. Would I still be able to see him? Dr. Perez smiled gently. Yes, but your relationship would need to evolve, Lily. Over time, you would need to have less direct contact and more observational interaction, watching from a distance, allowing him to come to you on his terms, and gradually reducing the time you spend together. Lily's face fell slightly, but she nodded with a maturity that belied her years. Because he needs to be more wild to stay safe. Exactly, Dr. Perez confirmed. It's a process called rewilding, and it would be challenging for both of you. But it would give Rusty the best chance at a healthy, natural life while still providing some protection. Rusty, perhaps sensing he was the topic of conversation, stood and stretched before padding over to Lily. He rested his chin on her knee, his amber eyes gazing up at her with that uncanny intelligence that had drawn them together from the start. Lily placed her hand gently on his head. "I want to try," she said firmly. "I want to help him be wild, even if it means seeing him less. It's what Mom would say is right." David felt his throat tighten with emotion. In that moment, his daughter seemed to channel Sarah's essence, her compassion, her wisdom, her deeply held belief that loving something meant doing what was best for it, not what was easiest for oneself. Over the next few days, the plan took shape with remarkable speed. Ranger Jacobs identified an ideal location for a more secure den, a natural hollow beneath the roots of a massive cedar tree, positioned on high ground where water wouldn't pool during winter rains or spring thaw. With David's help, she expanded and reinforced the space, creating multiple entrance points and installing subtle weather protection that blended seamlessly with the natural environment. Dr. Perez developed a nutrition plan designed to supplement Rusty's hunting without creating dependence. Small caches of appropriate food would be hidden at increasing distances from the cabin, encouraging Rusty to expand his territory while ensuring he wouldn't starve during the harshest weeks of winter. Most importantly, both experts worked with Lily on building Rusty's survival skills. They taught her how to mimic the warning sounds foxes make when predators approach, how to encourage Rusty's natural tendency to cache food for later, and how to gradually increase the distance between them during their interactions. Through it all, Lily remained focused and determined, absorbing each lesson with the intense concentration that characterized her approach to things that mattered deeply to her. David watched with a mixture of pride and concern as his daughter channeled her love for Rusty into helping him become more independent, precisely the opposite of what most children her age would do with a beloved animal. "You're doing an amazing job, Lily," Dr. Perez told her one afternoon after they had successfully taught Rusty to respond to a specific whistle that mimicked a fox's alarm call. "Not many adults could do what you're doing, let alone children." Lily shrugged, her eyes following Rusty as he investigated the new den site. "He's my friend. Friends help each other be their best selves." The quote was one of Sarah's favorites, something she had often said to Lily when encouraging her to embrace her unique way of seeing the world. Hearing it now, in this context, made David's heart ache with a bittersweet mixture of loss and gratitude. The real test came a week later, when Ranger Jacobs arrived with a small box containing a carefully prepared scent marker. "This is coyote urine," she explained, holding the container at a safe distance. "Wild foxes learn to recognize this scent as danger. We need to teach Rusty to avoid it." Lily wrinkled her nose at the pungent odor when Ranger Jacobs opened the container a crack for her to smell. "That's terrible," she said, taking a step back. "It's meant to be," Ranger Jacobs explained. "Natural warnings are supposed to be unpleasant. We're going to create a scent boundary around your property using this. It should help deter actual coyotes from entering the area, and it will also teach Rusty to associate this smell with danger." The process was methodical. Working together, they placed small amounts of the scent marker at regular intervals around the property line, creating an invisible barrier that would register clearly to an animal with Rusty's sensitive nose. When they had completed the circuit, they brought Rusty to one of the marked spots and let him investigate. His reaction was immediate and powerful. He backed away, ears flattened against his head, tail lowered in clear discomfort. Then, to everyone's surprise, he looked directly at Lily and made a sharp yipping sound, a perfect mimic of the alarm call they had been practicing. "He's warning me," Lily said with quiet wonder. He thinks I'm in danger from the coyote smell. That's extraordinary, Ranger Jacobs murmured. He's not just learning, he's teaching. Over the following weeks, as winter settled firmly across the forest, the transformation in Rusty became increasingly apparent. He still visited the cabin daily, but his stays grew shorter. Sometimes he would appear just long enough to check on Lily before disappearing back into the woods, presumably to patrol his growing territory or to practice his hunting. Lily noted each change with a mixture of sadness and pride, dutifully recording Rusty's behaviors in a journal that Dr. Perez had suggested she keep. Each evening, she would read her observations to David, her voice steady even as she documented the gradual distancing that was the necessary goal of their efforts. Rusty found the food cache near the big rock today. She reported one night in mid-December. He ate some and buried the rest for later. That's good fox behavior, right? Very good, David confirmed. It shows he's planning ahead, which is exactly what he needs to do to survive in the wild. The day Mike Tanner returned was the true test of their preparation. His truck rumbled up the driveway unannounced, and Lily and David emerged onto the porch to find him pulling on thick work gloves, his expression grim. Lost another chicken last night, Tanner announced without preamble. Tracks led this way. Figured it was time we settled this fox problem once and for all. David stepped protectively in front of Lily. Mr. Tanner, we've been over this. Rusty is too young to be killing your chickens. The game warden confirmed this when you made the same accusation months ago. He's bigger now, Tanner insisted, his gaze scanning the property. And foxes are foxes. It's in their nature to kill. Lily stepped out from behind her father, her voice surprisingly steady as she addressed the hostile man. Rusty didn't kill your chickens. He was with me all yesterday evening. We were practicing survival skills. Tanner snorted. Survival skills? It's a wild animal, girl. It doesn't need lessons. Actually, it does, came a new voice from behind them. Ranger Jacobs' truck had pulled up silently behind Tanner's, and she now approached with purposeful strides. Young foxes learn essential skills from their parents during their first year. Without that guidance, they often don't survive their first winter. The ranger's uniform and authoritative tone seemed to temper Tanner's aggression slightly. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Ranger Jacobs and the Morgans. Mr. Tanner, Ranger Jacobs continued, her tone professional but firm, I've been meaning to speak with you about your chicken coop. After investigating several reports, I believe your predator problem may actually be a raccoon, not a fox. I found distinctive raccoon tracks and scat near your property yesterday. Tanner's brow furrowed. Raccoon? But I've seen fox tracks. Foxes may visit your property, but the evidence suggests raccoons are your chicken thieves. I brought some information about predator-proofing your coop. She handed him a folder. This would be more effective than trying to eliminate every predator in the forest, an approach which, I'll remind you, is illegal on protected land. As this conversation unfolded, Lily had been scanning the forest edge. Suddenly, her posture stiffened, and she tugged urgently at her father's sleeve. Dad, she whispered. Look. There, at the boundary where yard met forest, stood Rusty. His russet coat was vibrant against the snow, his posture alert and wary as he observed the gathering on the porch. Most striking, however, was his position. He stood precisely at the line where they had placed the coyote scent markers, careful not to cross into what he now perceived as dangerous territory. Tanner followed Lily's gaze, his eyes narrowing when he spotted the fox. There it is, he muttered, starting to move in that direction. Mr. Tanner, Ranger Jacobs said sharply. That fox is part of a monitored wildlife rehabilitation project. Interfering with it would constitute a federal offense. Tanner froze, clearly weighing his options as he looked between the ranger, the Morgans, and Rusty, who remained perfectly still at the forest's edge, watching the scene with those intelligent amber eyes. After a tense moment, Tanner's shoulders slumped slightly. "Fine," he grumbled, turning back toward his truck. "But if I lose another chicken?" "You won't if you follow those coop recommendations," Ranger Jacobs interrupted firmly. "And I'll be checking in regularly to make sure everyone, human and animal alike, is respecting boundaries." As Tanner drove away, Lily kept her eyes on Rusty. The fox hadn't moved from his position, maintaining a careful distance while clearly monitoring the situation. "He's staying away from the house while strangers are here," Lily observed quietly. "That's good, isn't it? That's what a wild fox should do." Ranger Jacobs nodded, a smile of approval crossing her face. "That's excellent fox behavior, Lily. He's learning caution around unknown humans, which is exactly what will keep him safe in the long run." Only when Tanner's truck had disappeared down the road and Ranger Jacobs had stepped back to her own vehicle did Rusty finally move. He approached cautiously, sniffing the air to confirm the threat was gone. Even then, he maintained a new distance from Lily, close enough to see and communicate, but no longer pressing against her legs or climbing into her lap as he once did. Lily didn't try to close that gap. Instead, she knelt in the snow at the appropriate distance, respecting the boundaries that Rusty himself was establishing as part of his journey toward independence. "You did great," she told him, her voice clear and calm. "You stayed safe, just like we practiced." Rusty's ears perked forward at the praise, and he made a soft chirping sound that David had come to recognize as his response to Lily's voice. Then, after a brief exchange of gazes that seemed to contain volumes of unspoken communication, the fox turned and trotted back into the forest, disappearing among the trees with the fluid grace of a truly wild animal. Lily stood, brushing snow from her knees. "He's different now," she said to her father, her voice steady despite the emotion David knew she must be feeling. "More wild. Less mine. You've given him that gift," David said gently. "The gift of being who he truly is." Winter deepened, bringing the harshest weather in recent memory. Snow piled in drifts higher than Lily's head, and temperatures plummeted to record lows. During the worst storms, David worried constantly about Rusty's survival, though he tried to hide his concern from Lily. But the fox proved more resilient than anyone had anticipated. Even on the coldest days, they would occasionally spot him moving through the forest, his distinctive tracks showing his hunting routes and indicating he was using the reinforced den Ranger Jacobs had helped prepare. The visits to the cabin grew less frequent as winter progressed. Sometimes a week would pass without a sighting, causing Lily visible anxiety despite her understanding of the process. Then Rusty would appear briefly at the forest's edge, perhaps checking the food caches or simply ensuring his human family was still there, before disappearing again into the wild. "He's doing exactly what he should," Dr. Perez reassured Lily during one of her visits, establishing independence while maintaining awareness of safe resources. "It's the perfect balance." Lily nodded, though her expression remained solemn. "I miss him," she admitted quietly, "even though I know this is right." Dr. Perez placed a gentle hand near Lily's shoulder, respecting her need for personal space while offering comfort. "That's what makes what you're doing so remarkable, Lily. You're putting his needs above your own feelings. That's the purest form of love there is." As winter began its slow transition towards spring, a new development brought both wonder and a touch of sadness. During one of Rusty's increasingly rare appearances, Lily noticed he wasn't alone. A smaller red fox, probably a female based on her size and more delicate features, lingered at the edge of the forest while Rusty approached the cabin. "Dad," Lily whispered, pointing. "Rusty has a friend." David observed the pair with amazement. "That's incredible. Wild foxes usually mate for life, you know, if he's found a partner." "Then he's really wild now," Lily finished, her voice wavering slightly despite her brave smile. Over the next few weeks, they occasionally spotted Rusty and his companion moving through the forest together. The female never approached the cabin, remaining cautious and distant, but Rusty would sometimes visit briefly, maintaining the connection with Lily while clearly establishing his new life in the wild. On the anniversary of Sarah's death, David woke early to find Lily already dressed and standing at the window, watching the forest with quiet intensity. The past months had seen remarkable growth in his daughter, not just height and physical changes, but an emotional maturity that both amazed and occasionally worried him. She still struggled with the social aspects of autism, still needed her routines and boundaries, but she had developed a capacity for empathy and selflessness that many adults never achieved. "I want to visit Mom today," she said without turning from the window. "And I want to show her something." David nodded, though Lily couldn't see the gesture. "Of course. We can go to the cemetery after breakfast." "Not the cemetery," Lily replied, finally turning to face him. "The place where she died. The bend in the road where she swerved for the deer." David felt his chest tighten. They had never visited the accident site together. Though he knew Lily was aware of its location, he had pointed it out once when they were driving to town. A gentle curve in the highway marked now only by a small roadside cross that a neighborhood church group had placed. "Are you sure, Sweet Pea?" he asked gently. "That might be difficult." Lily nodded, her expression solemn but determined. "I'm ready now. I want to show her what we did with Rusty. She would understand." After a quiet breakfast, they drove to the curve in the highway where Sarah's life had ended. David parked carefully on the shoulder, and they walked together to the small memorial cross, partially obscured now by winter-dormant wildflowers. Lily knelt in the melting snow beside the cross, unconcerned with the dampness seeping through her jeans. "Mom," she said softly, as if Sarah could hear her, "I met a fox named Rusty. He was hurt and alone, like I was after you left. We helped each other." David stood a few steps back, giving Lily space for this private communion. He watched as she continued to speak quietly to the cross, explaining how they had healed Rusty's leg, how he had helped her find her voice again, and how they had eventually learned to let him return to the wild where he belonged. "I didn't want to let him go," Lily admitted, her voice barely audible to David. "But I remembered what you always said about loving something enough to do what's best for it, even when it's hard. Like when you swerved for the deer, even though it was dangerous." When Lily finally stood and returned to David's side, there were tears on her cheeks, the first he had seen since the early days after Sarah's death. But they weren't the desperate tears of inconsolable grief. They were quiet tears of remembrance and acceptance. "I think she would be proud of you," David said softly. "I know I am." Lily slipped her hand into his, a rare voluntary contact that made David's heart swell. "She would be proud of us," Lily corrected. "We did it together." As spring fully arrived, the forest around the Morgan cabin came alive with new growth and activity. The snow melted, replaced by carpets of wildflowers and the vibrant green of fresh leaves. Rusty's visits grew even less frequent, but occasionally they would spot him patrolling the edges of what they now understood to be his territory, sometimes alone, sometimes with his mate. Then, on a warm morning in early May, Lily came running into the kitchen, breathless with excitement. "Dad, come quick. Rusty's here, and he brought his family." David followed Lily onto the porch, where she was already pointing toward the edge of the forest. There, in the dappled morning light, stood Rusty. Beside him was his mate, more confident now though still watchful. But what drew David's breath away were the three tiny kits tumbling around their parents' feet, perfect miniature foxes with oversized ears and boundless energy. "They're beautiful," David whispered, afraid to speak too loudly and frighten the rare visitors. Lily nodded, her expression a complex blend of joy and wistfulness. "He's teaching them, like we taught him." Indeed, Rusty seemed to be deliberately showing his offspring the boundary of their territory, correcting their movements when they strayed too close to the cabin, yet clearly comfortable bringing them within view of the humans he still considered part of his extended family. After a few minutes of observation, Rusty left his mate watching the kits and approached the cabin alone. He stopped at what had become his customary distance, close enough for communication but maintaining his wild independence. There he sat, his amber eyes finding Lily's with the same intensity that had characterized their first meeting months ago. Lily stepped down from the porch and knelt in the grass, respecting the distance Rusty had established. "Hello, friend," she said softly. "Thank you for showing me your family." Rusty's ears flicked forward at the sound of her voice, and he made the soft chirping sound that David had come to recognize as his unique greeting for Lily. Then, in a gesture that seemed deliberate in its significance, he approached closer than he had in months, briefly pressing his muzzle against Lily's outstretched hand before retreating to a comfortable distance. Lily remained perfectly still, her expression one of quiet wonder. "He's saying thank you," she whispered to David, who had joined her in the yard, "for helping him find his real life." David couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He simply nodded, watching as Rusty returned to his wild family at the forest's edge. The fox paused there, looking back once more at the humans who had saved him, healed him, and ultimately given him the greatest gift, the freedom to be what he truly was. Then, with a flick of his bushy tail, Rusty led his family back into the depths of the forest, the kids bouncing along behind their parents, learning the ways of their kind as fox kits had done for countless generations before them. Lily remained kneeling in the grass for a long time after they disappeared from view. When she finally stood and turned to David, her expression was peaceful, touched with a maturity beyond her years. "He'll come back sometimes," she said with quiet certainty. "Not often, but enough." "Yes," David agreed, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. "I believe he will." That evening, as twilight settled over the forest, David found Lily sitting on the porch swing, her journal open on her lap. Since they had begun the rewilding process with Rusty, she had faithfully documented every observation, every milestone, every small victory along the path toward his independence. Now, she was making a new entry, her pencil moving with deliberate precision across the page. "What are you writing?" David asked, settling beside her on the swing. Lily didn't look up from her work. "I'm writing about Rusty's kits, about how they look and how he's teaching them, and about how it feels to see him as a wild fox with a family." "And how does it feel?" David asked gently. Lily paused, considering the question with the thoughtful reflection that was so characteristic of her. "It feels right," she finally said. "Like this is where the story was always supposed to go. Rusty needed us for a while, and I needed him. But now he needs to be wild, and I need to be me." David felt a surge of emotion at his daughter's words. Her journey with Rusty had changed her in profound ways, helping her navigate her grief while teaching her about love, sacrifice, and the complex beauty of letting go. Through helping the fox find his place in the world, Lily had begun to find her own. "I'm thinking about writing a book," Lily continued, surprising David. "About Rusty. About everything we learned together. Dr. Bennett says it might help other kids who feel different or who have lost someone." "I think that's a wonderful idea," David said warmly. "Your story with Rusty is pretty special." Lily nodded, closing her journal and gazing out at the darkening forest. "It's not just Rusty's story or my story," she said thoughtfully. "It's also Mom's story because she taught me about the right kind of love. And it's your story too, Dad, because you helped me when it was hard." David blinked back tears, amazed once again by his daughter's insight and perception. "Maybe we could write it together," he suggested. Lily considered this for a moment, then nodded. "I like that. We could start with the day I first saw him at the edge of the forest." "The day everything changed," David agreed softly. As darkness settled fully over the forest, a distant sound drifted from the trees, the distinctive call of a fox, clear and confident in the night air. Lily smiled, recognizing Rusty's voice among the many sounds of the wilderness that had become their home. "He's teaching his kids to sing," she said, a note of pride in her voice. David nodded, listening to the haunting, beautiful calls that echoed through the darkness. "And they'll teach their kids someday, carrying a little bit of what they learned from you." Lily leaned against her father's side, another voluntary contact that showed how far she had come in her healing journey. Together, they listened to the fox songs until they faded into the distance, replaced by the gentler sounds of wind in the trees and the soft chorus of night insects. Later, as David tucked Lily into bed, a routine she had recently started to outgrow but still accepted on special days, she asked a question that caught him by surprise. "Dad, do you think we could get a dog someday?" "Not to replace Rusty," she added quickly. "Nothing could ever replace him. But maybe another kind of friend, one that's meant to be domestic instead of wild." David smiled, recognizing in her question not just healing, but growth, the ability to hold the memory of Rusty dear while opening her heart to new connections and possibilities. "I think that would be wonderful," he said warmly. "Maybe we could visit the shelter in Pine Hollow next weekend, just to see." Lily nodded, considering this with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "Maybe a rescue dog. One that needs a second chance, like Rusty did." "Like all of us did," David added gently. After Lily had fallen asleep, David stepped out onto the porch one last time, gazing toward the forest that had transformed from a strange and intimidating wilderness to a place of healing and connection for both of them. Somewhere in those dark woods, Rusty was teaching his family the lessons he had learned during his time with Lily: caution, resilience, and perhaps even something about the complex, beautiful bond that could form between species so different yet fundamentally alike in their capacity for trust and love. The greatest gift they had given Rusty was the freedom to be wild, to follow his true nature despite the risks that came with that choice. But the gift Rusty had given them was equally profound. He had shown them that healing was possible, that connection could bridge even the deepest divides, and that loving sometimes meant letting go. As a fox's distant call echoed once more through the night, David smiled. The wild would always be wild, and Rusty would always be a creature of the forest, following the ancient instincts of his kind. But he would also, in some small way, forever be a part of their family, a connection that transcended the boundaries between human and animal, domestic and wild. In that knowledge, David found a peace he hadn't felt since Sarah's death. Life moved in cycles of connection and separation, of holding close and letting go. The pain of loss would never fully disappear, but neither would the joy of the bonds they had formed, both those that remained and those that had transformed into something new and equally precious. As he turned to go inside, David cast one last glance toward the forest. "Good night, Rusty," he whispered. "Thank you for bringing her back to me." And somewhere in the darkness, as if in response, a fox called once more before silence settled over the wilderness, not the silence of emptiness, but the quiet fullness of a world where every living thing was connected, each finding its own unique path to freedom and belonging.